Alright, so I'm going to be showing you how you can actually automate daily tasks that actually happen in your agency. The first thing we want to do is figure out which tasks you actually need to automate to make sure we get that high leverage tasks that will actually save you a lot of time and money. Then I'm actually going to show you how to break each task down and actually optimize them. And then we're going to be going over the automation side of things, and we're going to build a couple live examples to give you an idea of how you can actually use these no-code tools to easily automate the daily tasks that are actually happening within your agency. We might as well get straight into it. First thing we actually want to do is get your priorities straight. Now, when a random guy in orange clothing comes up to you and asks you what do you actually want to automate, most people think about 1,000 of different things they actually need to do. But this isn't necessarily the best thing, because even though you have 1,000 different ideas of different things you want to automate that will make cool to automate, the chances that you actually complete a majority of them is very, very low. So what I want to do instead is go through this section, and the whole aim of this is to allow you to pick those 3, 10, something like that, but a low level of different tasks that when you actually automate will firstly be easy to automate, but then secondly will allow you to actually leverage your time and the effort you actually put into them to really get a great result, because the chances of you actually completing them are much, much higher, which is what we're aiming for. By the way, guys, just for context, my name is Leo. I'm the CEO and founder of Fluxomate, an operation agency which helps thousands of agencies all over the world set up scale-proof systems. We work with a lot of agencies, and automation plays a massive role when we do that. So the whole aim of this video, I'm basically just showing you easy ways you can kind of find those annoying daily tasks that you're doing, basically automate them to save you or your team a lot of time and money. So we basically want to be able to pinpoint the tasks that we actually need to automate that, once again, will give us the highest leverage. So basically the ones that are easier to set up still save us a lot of time and money. And the way we actually identify that is by looking for 3 key things. The first thing is repetitiveness. Now, if a task is repetitive in its nature, in the sense that, when you do it, it doesn't change course too much in terms of the actual actions you're doing, that's a really, really good light, because that's something that'll be easy to automate. The second thing we're looking at is tasks that are frequent or happen in regular patterns. So, for example, a task that will be frequent will be something that happens at the start of every week, or something that happens once every month. A task that happens on a regular pattern is something that happens as soon as a client gets onboarded. These will be tasks that, once again, will be easier to automate. And the third point is quite important, is we want to identify tasks that actually take a lot of time to actually complete. We're basically looking for tasks that are repetitive, frequent, and take time. Now, in all cases, they won't have to meet every single one of these criteria. However, these tasks that meet all 3 points will be the ones that are most leveraged. So that's what we're actually going to be aiming for when we actually try and figure out what tasks we need to automate within your agency. Now, don't worry, I'm going to make this super, super easy for you. But in order to actually pick and find out which one of these daily tasks, I've got a method that may help you out. Some people already have an idea, but I still recommend you kind of go through this method, because your idea in most cases isn't a real constraint. So what you always want to do is use this Google Tracker sheet, and you can access this using the first link in the description. It'll be 100% free. And for 7 days, you basically want to set up a 30-minute timer, and every 30 minutes we'll write down what you're doing. And I'll show you an example. For those of you who are actually thinking, watching this, oh wow, I'm going to have to actually wait and actually do some work. Well, yes, this is the best way to actually identify what you're doing and figure out what the highest pain point tasks actually are within your agency. So this is very simple. Obviously, you can adjust it depending on what time you're actually working, but you basically want to set a 30-minute timer, and every 30 minutes you write down what you do. So for example, at 5, I can say worked on client work. And obviously you keep that going, and you keep this going for 7 days at minimum. The longer you do this, the more tasks you'll be able to identify. And at the end of the process, you're basically going to look something like this. Now, once again, this is the 7-day process, but even on day 1, right, as you're kind of going through this process, you'll start to notice different things and think to yourself, man, why am I even doing this manually? So that's the whole purpose of the sheet. The longer you do this, the better it is. And guys, I wouldn't recommend you just do this. I also recommend, if you have employees, getting your employees to actually join it. But the key thing is, when you actually get your employees to do this, you want to frame it in a way that you're not sort of micromanaging them. It's more so of a way that you want to make their life a bit easier. So if I were to present this to one of my employees, for example, I'll say something along the lines of, oh, by the way, we're looking at automating different things to make your life a bit easier so you can do more in less time. This won't affect you, but I just want you to kind of go through this process and kind of write down what you're doing every 30 minutes. Now, once again, the better relationship you have with your employees, the easier this will be. If it's someone that's a bit newer, they might feel like you're micromanaging them still a bit, but at the end of the day, it is in their favor, because you're trying to set up different automations to make their life easier. So once you've actually completed this Google Sheet, you basically want to go through it and highlight 3 different things. So orange is going to count as 1 point, yellow is going to count as 2 points, and green is going to count as 3 points. 1 point is basically one of these kind of criteria. So for example, if a task was frequent, it will count as 1 point. If a task took a lot of time and was repetitive, that will count as 2 points. And if a task was repetitive, frequent, and took a lot of time to actually do, that will count as green. At the end of the progress, you're basically looking for something like this, where you have a long list of all the different tasks you're doing and the different highlighted sections corresponding to tasks that are frequent, repetitive, and take a lot of time to actually do. What we're basically aiming for is the low hanging fruit. So we are going to start off with kind of focusing on the green sections and those green tasks because those are the ones that are actually going to be easier to automate. But obviously, once you kind of made your fruit way through the green tasks as we go through the two different steps in this video, then you can obviously move on to the yellow stuff or even orange stuff, depending on which one you kind of prefer. That's how you can basically get an understanding of what tasks you actually need to automate. Now it's time to actually break it down. So at this point, it's very, very tempting to just begin building. But especially for more complicated tasks, if you just go straight into building without actually planning the tasks or having a good idea of what you're actually doing, you might end up doing some silly mistakes like these guys here. I mean, you don't want water coming out of your electrical socket. So I'm going to show you how you can actually plan your automation before you actually start building. And obviously the benefit of this is that you get to spot any mistakes. But in all honesty, guys, the main benefit of this is that you get a chance to actually optimize your process. As you kind of break it down into the different steps and make it very, very clear in terms of exactly what you're doing for any task, you get really good understanding and you ask yourself different questions like, oh, why am I actually doing this? Or is this step even necessary? Or I'm not even sure how I actually do this, right? But most importantly, you kind of think to yourself, is there a better way to do this? So the reason we actually do this before automation is because creating an automation is kind of like setting something in stone. Now, what I mean by that is when you're actually creating different automations, you're basically repeating a process. But what we don't want to do is repeat a process that's not already optimized because then we're just going to repeat an inefficient process. And it is a bit longer to change a process once you've automated. Still possible, obviously. The automations are dynamic, especially nowadays with no-code tools like Make.com or Zapier. They're very, very easy to change. But still, I always go through the step of kind of planning my automations first before I actually build them out because it always saves me a lot of time. And just for context, guys, I mean, this is the exact same thing that I do in my agency when work the agency is on a one-to-one level. We spend the first 1 to 2 weeks of our actual program just going through an audit. And this is about 10 to 15 hours on Zoom, one-to-one with the client. And don't get me wrong, this takes up so much resources and time on our end. But we do this with every single client. And it's kind of based on this quote by Bill Gates, which if you don't know this man right here, let's just say he started quite a large company. And I'll read it out to you. The first rule of any technology used in a business is that automation applied to inefficient operation will magnify the efficiency. The second is that automation applied to inefficient operation will magnify the inefficiency. So we basically, what we don't want to do is automate the inefficiency because like he said, we're just magnifying the inefficiency and doing it on a regular basis. So we basically go through this audit and identify different things and different ways you can actually improvise or optimize, our process. So now that you have a kind of a rough idea of why we're actually going through this step first and kind of breaking the task down to a score, you're probably wondering, how do I actually do this? And it's quite simple. It's broken down into two main steps. The first thing we need to do is break down what we're currently doing. So we're going to get our list. We're going to pick one of the green tasks and we're going to basically break down the task like a detective from an outside perspective into every single step that happens as you actually do that task. Now, to actually do this, I'd recommend using a whiteboard like the one I've got back there, or you can also use an online whiteboard. The one I'm using in this case, this is Figma, which is, just an online whiteboard. In all honesty, guys, there's so many of them out there and they're all fairly similar. So just choose whichever one works for you. Most of them have free trials anyways. And you basically want to break it down to a score. And this is something I learned when I was in secondary school, which for you guys is basically like the high school in the UK. And it's also something I learned in university when I was studying aerospace engineering. And the concept is simple. When we were basically in a lab doing different experiments, we needed to create methods, which are basically step-by-step guides. And I'll never forget this, guys. My teacher in school told me, when you're actually creating these methods, you need to break it down like you're talking to a 6-year-old, so a complete beginner. And I'm sure you've seen that video of his dad actually doing with his kids. I saw it recently. But he tells them, instruct me how to spread the peanut butter and jelly on toast. And they'll say something like, okay, get the knife and get some peanut butter. But then he tried to cut through the peanut butter jar because they didn't say to open it. That's how much detail they actually go in. Obviously, that's kind of a silly example just to give you the idea of how to do this. But you want to go in as much detail as you possibly can to all the relevant information. Kind of like you're creating an SOP for someone that's very, very young and doesn't know what they're doing. The exact same thing. Because as you do that, you're kind of think to yourself, okay, why am I actually doing these different things? And I'll give you an example, right? Let's say I wanted to make tea and I wanted to create an SOP or a process to automate the tea making process. Rather than saying, oh, okay, I want to get some boiler water, add the tea in, and then drink the tea, I would say something like, get the kettle, open the kettle, fill the kettle with 500 millimeters of water, put the kettle back on the stop, turn the kettle on, go to the cupboard, open the cupboard, get a mug, close the cupboard, put the mug on the table, get one tea bag, put the mug in the tea bag, add the boiling water, wait 5 minutes for it to cool down, drink the tea. That's obviously a silly example, but once again, you get the idea. You want to break it down step by step. And then once you've done that, you want to rinse and repeat that for every single one of the other tasks you actually need to do, which once again, you've highlighted in the sheet. I always recommend starting off with the green stuff because once again, that is a low hanging fruit, which is basically the things that will be easier to do and will get your highest return on your time. However, once you've gone through all your different greens, or if you don't have any greens, you can do the yellows or the oranges. Once you actually go on a current breakdown using that method, then we actually want to optimize what we're doing. Now, this is a little bit harder, I won't lie to you, and it is a bit unlikely that you're going to optimize it fully. For example, if you were to work in one-to-one with me. However, you can still make a big indent and optimize at least part of it, which is better than nothing. So what we basically want to do is go over the steps you kind of created in the previous step. And as you're going through them, you'll think of different things like, I don't know how to do that, or why am I actually doing that? And that will give you the opportunity to kind of reflect on yourself and using your own experience and your own skills, actually improve that task. I'm telling you guys, in a lot of cases, you do kind of know the unit answers, but because you haven't really mapped out a process before, then you haven't really had the chance to even implement your own skills to improve it. So even just mapping this out, you'll have more than enough ideas on how to actually implement it. If you do want more ideas, you can check out the Skill Proof Roadmap. Now, what actually is this? This is a resource that we put together in our free community. It's 100% free, and it's basically a step-by-step guide on how we actually set up skill proof systems. In stage one, which is one of the 5 stages of the program, you can see we kind of go over how to actually optimize your current breakdown. And within here, you can get access to 43 different questions going over how you can actually optimize your processes. Now, in this case, I will say it is a bit more complicated because in that program, we're focusing on automating an entire agency and setting up different skill proof systems. But still, it should give you different inspirations on some tasks you can do, for example, in your process like onboarding, your fulfillment process, or your sales process, even. There's so many different options you can do. So if you do need more help in terms of optimization, then you can check out the first link in the description to get access to that skill proof roadmap within our community. It's 100% free, and I think it will allow you to kind of improve the optimizations. But once again, your experience should be enough, and optimizing something by 50% is better than doing it by nothing. So take everything I say with a pinch of salt. By the end of it, you'll get something like this. So we have the current breakdown and optimized breakdown. I will say, guys, I don't want to overwhelm you. This is obviously a complicated version. This is actually some past work we've done for a client where we have the current breakdown on the left-hand side, so what we're previously doing for the fulfillment process, and optimized version on the right-hand side. But for you, it's not going to be that difficult because realistically, most of the tasks you actually identified, especially for daily tasks, are tasks that are not too complicated. So that's just an idea to get you started, but it doesn't have to be anywhere near that. But before we actually move on to the next stage, you just want to make sure that all the tasks you actually highlighted, specifically the green ones, you have a current breakdown and optimized version for. Then we can actually move on to the next stage with actually building automation. Now you're probably thinking, finally, this guy's actually finally talking about automation. That's the whole purpose of the video. Well, yes, let's just say it did just get interesting, but I will say, guys, if you did kind of skip this using the tags on the video, then I really recommend before you actually move on to this step, you want to make sure you get your priorities straight in terms of what you actually need to automate, because that's how you're going to find those high leverage tasks, and also break it down. Because trust me, guys, I've done this either way. It makes your life so much easier when you break a process down before you actually automate it. It avoids any silly mistakes. And most importantly, if you spend that 10-15 minutes doing that before you actually build it, you don't have to spend that hour, 2 months or 3 months down the line trying to figure out how you actually build this automation and figuring out why it's not working. So in order to actually automate your daily tasks, do these 2 things first, and then we can talk about automation. So in terms of actually automating this, we're going to be using no-code tools. The 2 main ones are Make.com and Zapier.com. Now, I won't lie to you guys, there's probably 1,000 different videos going over the differences and which one is better. In all honesty, I'm not associated with any of them, so I just recommend you try out the free plan on both of these tools and figure out whichever one works for you. This graph kind of puts everything together. The more you fuck around, the more you actually find out, and the more you kind of can figure out which one works better for your specific needs. Both of the tools are fairly similar in all honesty, so I recommend just going with the one that actually works for you. In this video, we're going to be using Make.com. I'm not going to be wasting your time or disrespecting you by going over how to actually set up, because once again, if you do need help with that, you can check out different videos online. But I do want to go over a simple example build of how you can actually automate a task within your agency. And in this specific example, we're going to be going over how you can automate a task to automatically create shared Google Drive folders as part of a new content creation process. So once again, a very, very simple example, but I just want to show you the fundamentals of how these automation platforms actually work. And then once I do that, I'm going to be going over 5 different ways you can actually improve this system and build much, much more complex automations once you've covered those kind of green ticks. But let's go straight into my make.com account and we're going to go ahead and create a new scenario. All right, guys, so I've just made my way to my make.com account. Once again, doesn't matter if you're using make.com or Zapier, whatever I'm showing you today, you can kind of apply to whatever software you're using. You get a lot more values from my video in general if you focus more so on the frameworks of what I'm actually talking about rather than the specifics such as what specific software I'm using. Because anything I'm doing today on make.com, you can do on Zapier or any other automation tool you actually want to use. So we're here on my make.com account. I'm just going to go ahead and press this new, create a new scenario. Now this account I actually use my YouTube videos. So I'm just going to go ahead and rename this daily automation, #1. Cool. Now, the first part of any automation is the trigger. This is probably the most important part because it's what actually initiates the process to actually make this automation work. If you haven't set up your trigger correctly, there's no point going past the previous steps because the automation is never going to run. So make sure you kind of identify your trigger. In this example, what I'm basically going to be creating is a system that whenever I fill out a form is going to create different Google Drive folders based on the content on the actual form. Then we want to be able to share this Google Drive link in an email to the relevant person. So quite a simple automation, but it will give you a good example of how to actually use these different tools and also give you insight on the different frameworks we use when building automations. Because in all honesty, guys, this is an example of a basic automation. I've done a video going over this, but the way I see it is 3 different types of automations. This is the basic automation, which is the most simplest thing you can actually set up. So this is basically what we're working with today. If you do want to see more complicated automations, then after watching this video, you can check out this video in the top right hand corner as well. That's an example of a bit more complicated automation. And honestly, guys, the more you do and the more you kind of play around with these tools, the more crazy things you can create. But once again, I'll go over that in a second. We actually talk about how to create better automations. So within this process, this is our daily automation. So the trigger is going to be a Google form submission. So in this example, we have this very, very simple form. And all we're doing here is basically collecting who we actually want to share it with, what is the video actually called, and adding any additional notes if necessary. So if we go back to our make.com account, we can go over here. And the trigger for this is going to be a Google form. So I can just search for Google form. And as you can see, guys, there's so many different integrations that these platforms have already set up. That's honestly one of the main benefits that we actually have of using these different platforms like Mate.com and Zapier is that they already package those APIs for you, which make your life so much easier. So within Google Forms, I'm going to open up the actual module and look how many options they have available. But the one I really care about is watch responses. Now, what this is basically going to do is every 15 minutes, which you can set up over here just by pressing this button, is going to check for different things. I can change it to 30 minutes if I wanted to, or 1 hour. But what this basically does is whatever time period you actually put, it's going to go ahead and actually check for any new responses or completions to that Google form. Now, you could also put this to 1 minute if you wanted to. It's going to take up a lot more operations. But before we actually move on to the next step, though, we do need to connect that form ID. Now, you could search for it just by searching for a name right here, or you could alternatively go to the actual ID just by selecting this part of the URL right here, copying that, and then going back here and pasting it here. Just like that. The limit is basically the limit of the number of forms that are going to be processed at one time. So depending on how often you actually put your check to actually, go over and see new responses, you have to adjust it. So for example, if I expect to have more than 1 response over the space of half an hour, I'll probably increase this to something more like 5 to make it a bit more reasonable. Because if there, for example, are 6 automations within that half an hour or 6 form completions, within that half an hour, then this automation is not going to count for the 6th one. So obviously adjust this depending on how much volume I actually get for that form. And I'm going to set this to all because no form completions have been done. So if I go ahead and run this now, just to give an example, nothing's going to come up. However, if I now go back to the form and I go ahead and make a very quick response, so I want to share it with Leo at Fluxomate.com. The video is going to be called Daily Automation, and I want to add nothing. I'll go ahead and submit this. Now, if you go back to our automation and we try to run this again, we should now get that output. Not yet. So let's say you might have just searched for the wrong thing. So let's go ahead and delete this, go back to our actual form and just get this code again. I might have just copy and pasted it incorrectly. Go back to automation, press paste, press OK, and just run this again. So it seems as if I'm not signed in properly. So I'm just going to go ahead and re-sign in, press continue. And that should fix the problem. If not, we probably have a bigger problem on our hands, but let's see what happens. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of reconfirmed it. It should now automatically work. I've got that form ID here, and I'm just going to run it again from all. and see if it actually pulls up any information, which it's still not doing. So what I'm actually doing instead of copy and pasting a form ID like I usually do, I'm just going to go ahead and search for this form. So this is called the content process automation. So if I go back to my com account and I put search document title and then search that, and I go ahead and press OK, it should give me that ID, which as you can see it does. So I just basically got the wrong ID, which is fine. Now if I run this again, we should get that response that I just submitted, as you can see right here. Now I am actually going to leave that part in the video because it kind of shows you the importance of just messing around with these different tools. I could have just stopped right there and kind of gave up, but sometimes with most automations you will run into a lot of mistakes, and you just have to kind of work your way backwards the same you would with any sort of problem solving skills, and figure out a problem and then solve it, just like I did right here. So I think it's valuable to kind of keep that in the video. So as you can see here, we have all my form responses. So what's the video called? Daily automation. Anything you want to add? Nothing. And who do you actually want to share it with? And we should get that email that I actually entered. Perfect. Obviously, I asked three very, very simple questions, and this is just an example of a trigger, but I want to show you how you can actually easily connect this to something else like Google Drive. So for example, now I'm going to go ahead and add another module, and this time it's going to be Google Drive, so I'm going to search for Google Drive. And as you can see, there's so many different options here, but all we want to do here is basically create a folder. So as you can see, my connection is already there. So the first thing we want to actually do is kind of choose where we actually want to load this new folder. Let's say in this example, I want to load it in actual client folders. Now this is just an example. And now we actually want to move on. For the folder's name, which is going to be the key part of this automation, we want to enter that response from the Google form. So to actually do that, I'm going to go over with what do you want this video to be called? Open up the text answers, open up the answers again, and then enter that value. Obviously, this is like gibberish right now, but we're actually going to be able to share this. But when we actually create this, you'll see in a second, it's going to create that folder based on the actual name given in that form. So I'm going to go ahead and actually also share the folder, and it's going to be reader to user. And then we're going to enter that user's email from, once again, the text answers of that form. So if I open up who do you actually want to share it with, and I'll move this up here, and I'll move this over here so you guys can actually see a bit better. Just by going over here, moving this up, and just pressing this again. Open up text answers again, open up answers, we get that email right there. So now we're going to automatically share it with that specific user. So I'm going to go ahead and press OK. And before I actually run this automation again to actually show you how this works, I'm going to quickly open my Google Drive to show you there's no documents at the moment. So if I go to my Google Drive, so here's my example Google Drive. I use this for my editor, and it's pretty much it, to be honest. But if I go to the Drive and I scroll down to the client folders, you can see we have a couple folders here that, from what I did in a previous video, but nothing crazy, right? But if I go over and actually run this automation again, you can see it's going to collect the form responses and then automatically create a Google Drive with a relevant person. So if I go back to now to this kind of make.com automation or the Google Drive side of things, and I go ahead and reload this, hopefully we should see that new folder being created. So as you can see, 1020, which is basically right now, we have a daily automation folder created. And in this example, I just realized it's not going to actually go ahead and share it, just because the email I used to use for this Google Drive is the email that kind of owns it. So that didn't really work out. But if I were to add a different email, in the second test we actually do is going to go ahead and automatically share with that email, which I'll show you in a second. So let's go back to automation. The only thing I want to do now is basically send an email to the person I actually shared it with to let them know that they have a new Google Drive they can check out. Obviously, this is quite a silly automation because I already see the use case of this, but let's say if you wanted to share with the editor, you could do this. So I'm going to search for the Gmail module, and I'm going to scroll all the way down until I see send the email. If you're not confident, you could also create a good draft. We're going to leave it as that. And for the recipient, I'm once again going to add the email address we collected from the form by scrolling all the way down to the form responses, entering up who do you want to share it with, open up again, go into answers, and getting that value right there. Now for the subject, I can be new video ready, and then for the content we can just write you have a new video which is ready for you to start it working on, and then we can add that video or folder link, and then get the folder link from the previous automation just by going over down here. And if you go to the sharing capabilities permissions, it should be a link somewhere here. There you go, the web view link. Perfect. So I'll just leave it as that, and then for the account you go ahead and actually connect your Google account. I don't think it'll work in this case, but we'll see. You might have to reconnect it. Yeah, so I'm just going to go ahead and refresh that just by signing in by Google and just connecting my account again. Once again, this is nothing complicated, guys. So I've gone ahead and actually signed in. So that should be all good now. I'm going to press allow, and now that should basically reconfigure this. So if I go ahead and close this, we should have the authorization. I'll go ahead and refresh it. So now that's basically set up. If I go back to my form and I'll do another one. So in this case, I'll put fluxomate@gmail.com. So we actually get that sharing capability ready and going. Gmail. gmail.com. The video, this one's going to be called Testing Automation Live. And then anything you want to add, I mean, it doesn't really matter. I could put gibberish here. So I'm going to go ahead and press submit. And if I go back to our automation and I choose this module right here, I can choose where to start. Now, I'm just doing this because I'm testing. Obviously, if you actually launch this automation, it would have done it automatically. And for the specific date, I'm just going to put today's date, and I'm going to put it a couple minutes in the past, just by going like this. Send it 2 minutes ago. And now if we actually run this, you can see it's going to get that form responses, create a Google Drive folder, and then send that email to the relevant person. So let's go back to our Google Drive. Firstly, in client folders, we should be able to see that testing automation live, which once again was created right now. And if we open this up and we go over to the sharing, you can see it's automatically shared with a relevant person, which is fluxomate@gmail.com. And now if I open up my email, we should see that email that we actually get from make.com. If I go ahead and open this up, you can see we have that email with new video ready, and it basically telling us that there's a new video ready for us to get started working on with the actual link. And if I press that, you'll see it'll take me to that specific folder, which if it loads properly, we're able to see it's that testing automation live folder, which is automatically shared with us. Guys, very, very happy with this. Obviously, guys, like I said, this is an example of a very, very simple automation, but I hope this kind of give you a perspective of how I actually build these automations. And now let me get into the pro tips on how to actually best utilize this whole guide in general. The first tip is play around with this. Now, as you kind of saw, when we're building automation, we're going to come across a lot of different errors. That's the whole point. It is very much a problem-solving aspect, which is why I love it so much. One of the reasons that I love doing aerospace in university, more specifically engineering, is because it allowed me to have so many problem-solving aspects. So we had to figure out different engine sizes, different seat arrangement, different things like that. And it's kind of a similar thing with automation, right? They are going to come across a lot of different problems, especially as you build much, much more complex automations. But if you actually spend the time playing around with it, trying to figure out the problem, trying to solve it, then you get a much better automation and actually get automation that works. You just have to keep going. You do have to play around with it quite a lot to get to the final destination, but it's all worth in the end, especially if you use this high leverage task that we can identify in the previous stage. The second pro tip I'll give you is that you don't want to automate what you need to systemize. This is a quote I got from Alex Amosi, and at the start of my automation career, I guess you could say, I didn't really pay much attention to this, but this is so true. Within those kind of green sections, you'll probably find some tasks that seem like, okay, this is the best thing ever, but in reality, it's not something you should automate. For example, when we start working with people, client success is always something they want to start working on immediately and kind of automate it. And I have to kind of take a step back and tell them and kind of walk them through, how important it is not to necessarily automate every single aspect of that. For context, guys, we work with agencies, right? So in the agency, the people's game is a massive part of the actual service. So the client experience they actually get. If you were to automate the whole process, yes, it'd be more efficient. Yes, you save time, and yes, you save a lot of money, but you wouldn't really get that client experience, which is why a lot of people stay obviously coupled with the results. So as you go in for the process, think to yourself, is this something I should automate or is it something I should systemize? And if the answer is the second part of that, then rather than actually creating automation, just create the SOP and hand it to your team. That will also make the life easier. Third pro tip I'll give you is check API documentation. Now, in most cases, especially for very, very simple things like the one I'll show you today, make.com and Zapier will already have the modules pre-built out for you. So it's just simple as selecting it, adding different information you want to add, and going on with the day. However, in some cases, the specific actions you want to create will not actually be integrated within make.com or Zapier. When that happens, it's not the be or end all. You basically just want to check the API document, and find that specific use case. Now, I will say this is a bit more difficult and a bit more advanced, but realistically, when you actually set up different complex automations, you will have to go down this road. But guys, honestly, use ChatGPT. It will be your best friend out there. It makes life so much easier. You do have to kind of go back and forth with it about to get the right solution, but it's much better than doing it by yourself. So if you're in a position where you don't have that task already pre-built in within the no-code platforms, check the API documentations for that specific platform, like for example, Gmail or MailChimp in this example, and kind of go over the API documentation and then use a webhook to connect it. The third tip I actually give you is use tutorials. Guys, I can't emphasize it enough. Automation tutorials, there's so many of them out there, and in most cases there'll be someone that's had the exact same problem you're having and created a whole 20-minute video breakdown on how to actually solve it. There's so many tutorials online. Even on my channel, I probably have about 90 different tutorials going over different automations. So if you want some inspiration of different things you can automate, or you're having a specific problem, use the actual resources that you have on the internet and watch how they actually do it and then implement it into your specific automation. But this brings me on to my last point, guys, which is don't get distracted. These tutorials, they are very helpful, don't get me wrong, and they're a lifesaver sometimes. However, in a lot of cases as well, these tutorials are showing a lot of cool, complex things which are very, very cool. And once you actually build it, you feel some sort of satisfaction, you get a little bit of dopamine, but in reality, they're not really useful. The only automations that you need to build out are the ones you actually identified in the previous stage. Don't get distracted building out some complex content automation that you're going to spend 2 hours working on, and then you're going to feel so accomplished. And in reality, you're probably going to use it once a year, if even. So even my own tutorials in the actual videos, don't get distracted by them, because the only things you need to automate is the things that you identified. If you go all the way back to our nice little tracker right here, start with the green, move to the yellow, and then go to the orange. And then if you have some more spare time on your hands, lucky you can go over different tutorials and learn different skills. Now, once again, these tutorials are great. I'm not saying don't use them. All I'm saying is be mindful when you're actually creating one of these automations, especially one of the more complex ones. Think to yourself, okay, why am I actually creating these automations? And I think that will solve a lot of your problems in terms of getting distracted. But guys, that's pretty much it for this video. I've gone ahead and shown you how you can actually automate the daily tasks in your agency. If this was valuable, make sure to like and subscribe. It helps me grow the channel. And it's also a win-win for you, because you get to see more videos like this on your feed. Now, one thing I didn't mention is the Scale-Proof Agency Hub, which is basically our free community that we have. Within there, you get access to agency owners who actually look to set up scale-proof systems, direct access to me and my team, but most importantly, you get access to our resources. The biggest resource we have right now is a scale-proof roadmap, which is literally a step-by-step guide on how you can actually set up scale-proof systems in your agency. It's made up of 5 different stages, 40 modules, has over 475 different examples, and 1,332 minutes of content. And if you go through this process, you will be able to set up scale-proof systems in your own agency so that you can take on more clients at scale without ruining your clients' results. But within the classroom, we also have so many more resources. If you go over to the YouTube resources, you'll be able to access the resource from this specific video, such as the automation template, the mind map, and also that Google Sheet tracker, completely for free. So guys, make the most of it while you're still here. As with everything else we do, it's 100% free. So if any of that sounded interesting, check out the first link in the description to actually join. And that's pretty much it from me, guys. But one thing I will say is don't finish your learning here. The automation I showed you in this video is a very, very simple automation, literally for complete beginners. If you want something a bit more advanced to kind of give you a different idea of different automations that you can actually build, you can check out this video right here, where I basically go over how you can actually build the beginning of onboarding automation. This is a bit more complicated, still very simple if you're a beginner, but enough to kind of get your brain thinking of much different things you can actually do. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure to check that out. Don't finish your learning here, guys. Keep going. That's it from me, guys. Please let me know if you have any questions in the comments or in the community. At the end of the day, I'm here to actually support you guys. It's been a pleasure actually recording this video. If you follow the steps I'll show you today, you'll be able to automate daily tasks that actually happen in your agency, not just for you, but for your employees as well, to give them a better experience and give them all the tools they need to give your clients the best possible results. Hope this video has been valuable. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye bye.